The trail vanished sometime after noon. It didn't disappear all at once. It thinned, unraveled gradually, like a thread pulled from old fabric. The dirt path that had wound between the trees since morning became patches of flattened leaves, then faint impressions in moss, then nothing at all. "Pretty sure the map says we're still on it," Ethan said. He held the folded paper in one hand and rotated slowly, scanning the trees as if the path might reappear if he looked at the right angle. The forest had grown older around us. That was the only way to describe it. The trees weren't merely tall. They were ancient, thick trunks swollen with decades of rain and rot. Bark folded over itself in ridges and scars. Moss hung in damp curtains. The air smelled heavy and mineral, like wet stone and decomposing leaves. I checked the GPS on my phone again. No signal. "Maybe it loops," Maya said quietly. "Some of these backcountry trails do." But her voice carried an uncertainty she didn't bother to hide. The forest had gone strangely quiet. No birds, no insects. Even the breeze seemed to hesitate before moving through the canopy. Only the occasional creak of branches shifting high above us. We continued anyway, because once you've walked several miles into the woods, turning around feels less like a solution and more like surrender. An hour later, we found the first sap tree. It stood in a clearing that hadn't been there before. I would swear to that. Moments earlier, we had been pushing through dense brush, branches scraping our sleeves, the forest pressing tight around us. Then suddenly the trees parted, revealing a circle of open ground. In the center stood a massive pine. Its trunk was scarred by deep cuts where resin had bled out over the years. Thick amber sap had hardened into glossy bulges that caught the gray afternoon light. "Looks like someone tapped it," Ethan said. He stepped closer, examining the bark. But the sap wasn't dripping downward like normal resin. It had pooled in smooth, convex surfaces, like little golden mirrors. Maya crouched beside one. "Look at this." I knelt beside her. The sap was clear enough to reflect our faces. Or it should have been. Instead, the reflection showed 3 figures standing in the clearing. But they weren't us. At first, the difference was subtle. The proportions were wrong. The angles slightly distorted, like reflections in warped glass. Then the movement registered. Ethan lifted his hand. His reflection didn't. It stood perfectly still. "Okay," he said slowly. "That's weird." I leaned closer. In the amber surface, I saw my own reflection staring back. But the eyes moved independently of me. They shifted upward, meeting my gaze directly. A cold ripple passed through my chest. "That's not right," Maya whispered. The reflected version of her tilted its head. She hadn't moved. We all stepped back at the same time. The sap reflections followed us with their eyes. The forest made a sound then. A low, almost inaudible creaking. Not from the branches. From the trunks. Like wood expanding slowly under pressure. "Let's go," Maya said. No one argued. We left the clearing quickly, stepping over roots and fallen logs, moving deeper between the trees. But the forest had changed again. The air felt thicker. The ground softer, as if the soil had absorbed too much water. Our footsteps made dull, muffled sounds in the moss. After several minutes, Ethan slowed. "You hear that?" We stopped. At first I heard nothing. Then, footsteps. Behind us. Not close, but following. Crunching faintly through leaves. "Probably an animal," I said. But even as I said it, the rhythm felt wrong. Animals move in bursts. This was measured. Deliberate. Human. Ethan turned slowly. The forest behind us stood empty. Rows of trees disappearing into dim green shadow. The footsteps stopped. We kept walking. The silence pressed harder the deeper we went. Even our breathing sounded intrusive. Every few minutes I caught glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye. Shapes slipping between trunks, vanishing when I looked directly at them. Then Maya stopped again. Another one. Another clearing. Another tree. This one was older. The trunk split into twisted ridges like knotted muscle. Sap had flowed down in thick streams, hardening into bulbous pools that glowed faintly in the dim light. Ethan muttered something under his breath. "Don't look," he said. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I stepped closer. The sap's surface trembled slightly. Not dripping, breathing. Inside the amber reflection I saw 3 figures again. But this time they looked more accurate. Closer to us. Same clothes. Same posture. Only one difference. There were 4 reflections. The 4th stood behind us. Tall. Too tall. Its outlines stretched unnaturally upward. Shoulders elongated. Head tilted at an impossible angle. I turned. Nothing there. When I looked back at the sap, the 4th reflection had moved closer. It stood between us now. Watching, Maya grabbed my arm. "Don't." But Ethan leaned forward. His reflection smiled. Ethan wasn't smiling. "Guys," he whispered. His reflection lifted a hand. Pressed it flat against the inside of the sap. The amber surface bulged outward, like skin pushed from beneath. The tree made another slow creaking sound. Sap began to seep from the bark again. But instead of dripping downward, it spread sideways, across the trunk, across the ground, forming new reflective pools, each one showing the same thing. The 4th figure stepping forward. Out of the reflection, we ran. Branches whipped our faces. Roots caught our boots. But the forest seemed to shift around us, trees sliding subtly into our path, closing the spaces between them. Behind us, footsteps multiplied. 1 set became 2, then 3, then 4, and they matched our pace perfectly. Not chasing, just keeping up. We burst into another clearing and froze. Dozens of trees stood here, each trunk bleeding sap, each sap pool reflecting the same scene. Us standing in the clearing, and the others surrounding us. Our reflections, but wrong. Their movements slightly delayed. Their expressions stretched too wide. Their eyes too still. Maya backed away slowly. "They're copying us." One of the reflections lifted a hand. A moment later, Maya did the same. But she hadn't meant to. Her arm trembled. "I didn't." The reflection smiled and stepped forward. The surface of the sap rippled outward, like a membrane breaking. Something dark began to push through. Not flesh, not shadow, something in between. Ethan grabbed my shoulder. "Run!" We ran until night fell, until the forest thinned, until the distant glow of a highway appeared through the trees. None of us spoke. None of us looked back. When we finally reached the parking lot, the silence broke all at once. Cars rushing past. Wind moving freely again. The world felt normal. Too normal. We leaned against Ethan's truck, breathing hard. Maya laughed weakly. "Okay. That was... What the hell was that?" Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at the truck side mirror. His face had gone pale. "What?" I asked. He pointed. I looked. The mirror reflected the 3 of us standing in the lot. But something stood behind us. Tall, elongated, head tilted, exactly like the figure in the sap. Slowly, in the reflection, it raised one hand and rested it on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan gasped and spun around. Nothing there. Just the empty parking lot. The highway. The trees far in the distance. When we looked back at the mirror, there were only 3 reflections again. But one of them smiled. And none of us had moved our mouths. The deeper we walked, the more the forest tilted sideways. At first it was subtle enough to ignore. A slight angle to the trees. A strange lean in the trail. The kind of thing you might blame on tired eyes or uneven ground. We had been hiking since early morning, following a narrow backcountry route that barely appeared on the map. The trail wound through old-growth forest where the trunks were thick and furrowed, their bark blackened with age and moisture. Moss clung to everything. Branches, stones, even the air itself seemed heavy with it. It smelled like damp earth and rotting leaves. The silence was thick, too. No birds, no insects, just the occasional creak of wood shifting somewhere high in the canopy. I noticed the tilt when Ethan stopped walking. Do those trees look wrong to you? He asked. We followed his gaze. The trees ahead leaned slightly to the left. Not bent from wind or weight, tilted. Like someone had rotated the entire forest a few degrees and left everything else where it was. Maya shrugged. Probably the hillside. But the ground beneath us was level. Perfectly level. We kept walking. The trail narrowed until it became little more than a strip of flattened moss. Our boots sank softly into it, leaving dark impressions that filled slowly with moisture. The tilt grew more noticeable. Tree trunks no longer rose straight into the sky. They slanted, angling across our vision like the ribs of a collapsed structure. And yet they weren't falling. Their roots clung stubbornly to the soil. Okay, Ethan said quietly. That's definitely new. He gestured toward a pine ahead of us. It leaned nearly 15 degrees sideways. But the branches grew upright relative to the trunk, twisting in strange spirals as if they were trying to correct the imbalance. I took a step closer. The bark felt cold beneath my fingers. And slick. Sap had seeped from the trunk in long amber streaks. Except the sap didn't drip downward. It ran sideways along the bark, following the tilt, like gravity had shifted to match the trees. Maya noticed it too. That's not possible, she said. Her voice sounded slightly off. Not wrong, just misaligned. As if the sound had traveled to us at a slight angle. We continued deeper. The forest grew denser and quieter. Our footsteps began to sound strange. When my boots struck the ground, the sound came a moment later. A faint delay. Crunch. Step. Crunch. Step. Like the noise was taking a longer path to reach my ears. Do you hear that? I asked. Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah. But Maya didn't respond. She had fallen slightly behind us. When I turned, she was standing beside a cluster of thin birch trees. They leaned sharply to the side, their white trunks forming diagonal lines through the air. Maya stared upward at them, her head tilted. Not much, just enough to look uncomfortable. You okay? Ethan called. She didn't answer immediately. Then she blinked and straightened. Yeah, she said. Just weird. What is? She hesitated. For a second it looked like you two were standing sideways. The trail curved between two massive oaks. Beyond them, the forest shifted again. The tilt increased. Trees leaned at impossible angles now, 20 degrees, maybe more. But the ground beneath us remained flat. Or at least it felt flat. My eyes couldn't reconcile it. The horizon had slipped somewhere out of alignment. It made my stomach uneasy, like standing on a boat that wasn't moving. Then Ethan stopped again. Listen. We froze. A sound drifted through the trees. A voice, soft, almost a whisper, came from somewhere ahead but also from the side. The direction felt wrong. Hello, Ethan called. The voice answered, but not with words. It echoed his greeting. Hello, except the sound arrived from a different angle. From above, from the right, from somewhere behind the leaning trees. The forest absorbed the noise and returned it warped. Maya stepped closer to a tilted trunk. Did you hear that? Her voice echoed too, but the echo slid sideways through the woods, skimming along the angle of the trees before fading. Okay, Ethan said. That's enough weird for today. Let's head back. We turned around. The trail behind us had changed. It slanted slightly upward now. Walking back felt wrong immediately. Our balance shifted. I found myself leaning unconsciously to compensate for the visual angle of the forest. But the ground beneath my feet didn't match what my eyes were seeing. My body kept correcting for a tilt that wasn't there. It made every step awkward. Maya stumbled. Then again. Careful, I said. She laughed weakly. I feel like the ground's sliding sideways. We walked another 100 yards before I noticed something else. Our shadows. They stretched across the forest floor at long, thin angles. But they weren't pointing away from the sun. They slanted along the same direction as the trees, as if the light itself had tilted. Guys, Ethan said quietly. He pointed ahead. Someone stood among the trees. At first I thought it was another hiker. Then the shape moved. Not forward. Sideways. The figure slid between the trunks without stepping. Like gravity pulled it along a different direction. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Maya nodded slowly. The figure paused. Its body leaned at a sharp angle, matching the forest. Its head rotated slowly toward us. But the movement felt wrong, like watching something turn along an axis that didn't exist. Then it disappeared behind a trunk, sliding out of view. We didn't speak for a while after that. The forest felt heavier now, more deliberate. Branches creaked overhead, adjusting their angles. Moss hung in long strands that drifted gently upward. Upward. I stopped. "Why is that moss moving like that?" Ethan followed my gaze. Thin green strands dangled from a branch. But instead of hanging down, they stretched diagonally through the air, pointing sideways. Drips of water slid along them, climbing slowly uphill. Maya walked ahead of us. Her posture had changed. She leaned slightly now, not enough to fall, but enough to notice. "Maya," I said. She didn't respond. "Maya." She stopped walking, turned slowly. Her eyes looked unfocused. "Do you hear them?" she asked. "Hear what?" "The trees." Her head tilted further. "They're whispering." I listened. At first there was nothing. Then a faint murmur drifted through the trunks. Not words, more like breath passing between wooden ribs. Maya smiled faintly. "They're saying we're crooked." The trail eventually widened. The forest thinned. Sunlight filtered through the canopy again. The trees straightened gradually as we walked. By the time we reached the parking lot, everything looked normal, perfectly upright. Ethan leaned against the truck. "Okay," he said, exhaling. "That was not normal." Maya stood quietly beside the road. Her posture seemed normal again. For a moment, I felt the tension draining from my body. Then I noticed something strange. The horizon. The distant hills beyond the road looked slightly slanted. Just a little. I blinked. Maybe it was my eyes adjusting. Cars passed on the highway. People stepped out of another vehicle nearby. They walked normally. No one seemed off balance. "Hey," Ethan said, looking at me. "You good?" I hesitated. The world looked wrong. Buildings leaned slightly. Telephone poles angled gently to one side. The sky itself seemed tilted. "Yeah," I said slowly. But when I looked at Ethan and Maya, they stood perfectly upright, centered, aligned with gravity. Only I felt the pull. Only I saw the angle. Across the road, a tall streetlight cast a shadow. The shadow slid sideways across the pavement. And for a brief moment, it stood up,